So I said on yesterday's bonus show that today I was going to go through this new Middle East peace plan that has been released by Donald Trump and by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So let's do that. But in order to do it, we have to establish a few things first. Number one, Donald Trump knows nothing about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He's self-congratulating by calling this the deal of the century. He thought Jared Kushner was going to achieve Middle Eastern peace. It's a total joke at the get-go, and Trump is completely in over his head. Number two, this entire thing is absurd at its face because you have impeached President Donald Trump and indicted Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying, hey, we figured out a great plan with no Palestinian involvement in actually figuring out this plan. So that's ridiculous. And then number three, this is very clearly timed to suppress coverage of both Donald Trump's impeachment and Benjamin Netanyahu's indictment, respectively. It's laughable at its face, but let's take a little bit of a look at the parameters to see if we by chance come across something in this, quote, deal that makes sense. Palestinian leaders have rejected the deal on principle because it includes some annexations of West Bank land. Now, I've said before, I'm 100% against settlements by Israel which violate international law. The settlements need to stop. They need to stop now. And in any realistic long-term peace deal, and I'll lay out what that looks like a little bit later, there is going to be some West Bank land on which there are settlements likely swapped for land of equivalent value from Israel for a Palestinian state. Arafat in the 90s said that it's potentially okay if the land is equivalent. Whatever that means, that's going to have to be debated. But nothing is going to happen if there cannot be some land swaps. The deal that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu have put forth would include a 4-year freeze on new settlement construction. That's a start. The problem with it is that, does that mean that an existing settlement cannot expand, or that simply there can be no new settlements? And that difference is actually a really significant one. It will also provide a path to Palestinians for a contiguous territory for a future Palestinian state when certain conditions of statehood are met. Now, of course, Palestinians are not going to agree to the conditions that are outlined. The contiguity of the state is an important thing. And from the maps that have been put out, it looks like Gaza and the West Bank and a capital in East Jerusalem would be contiguous based on roads that would be made part of the state. So in principle, impeached Trump and indicted Netanyahu, establishing this without Palestinian involvement is a joke. A Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem is included in this, which is good, but it's mentioned only as part of East Jerusalem. That's going to be a tough negotiating point as well, if there is ever a negotiation to happen. And in total, this is effectively a political stunt. That's all that this is. And because this has come up and it's an opportunity to do it, let me review my peace plan. And as I said last time I did this years ago, almost everyone is going to find something they don't like about what I believe an eventual plan would look like. Every good compromise leaves everyone at least a little bit upset. That's why it's called compromise. But this is the way I would see the most likely path forward. First of all, we have to talk about who's in charge of negotiations. Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to preside over serious Israeli-Palestinian peace. It's just not going to happen. He's shown that it is not in his interests. He benefits from more tension and not having any kind of serious prospect for peace. So Benjamin Netanyahu cannot be the Israeli prime minister if we are going to see serious opportunities for peace. Hamas must be replaced by a more secular Palestinian authority in Gaza right away. Hamas is not going to be a serious negotiator of peace. What would Mahmoud Abbas's role be there, currently in charge of the West Bank? I'm open to expanding the role of Mahmoud Abbas. Hamas does not want that. Hamas has actually assassinated Fatah members in recent years. Abbas has often given, lie-riddled speeches at the United Nations. But to the extent that Abbas might be a productive partner, that's what I care about. I'm open to Abbas being involved in the eventual secular, ideally Palestinian authority that would be in charge. Law of return for Jews to Israel is going to have to be maintained. I don't see how you put a deal together without it. The whole point of Israel is Jews have been and continue to be discriminated against and kicked out of so many parts of the world. Israel is a place Jews know they can go, period. And as long as that is maintained, I don't know that I care too much about whether Israel is called a Jewish state. This is a point of contention that I am sort of flexible on. As long as the law of return remains, that is what I think is important. The Palestinian law of return for Palestinians to return to Israel is going to have to be conceded to some degree. And this is something that certainly governments like the Netanyahu government have not wanted. It can't be for 5 million Palestinians. It's just not going to happen. So again, I know that a lot of the reaction to this will be, David, you're acting like this wouldn't be fair or that wouldn't be fair. I'm trying to get to what is each side likely going to have to concede to have a serious opportunity. And Israel is not going to concede return for 5 million Palestinians, but some reasonable number that makes sense should be included. Once the blockade on Gaza is released, which it should be, anyone who wants to move back to Gaza or the West Bank should be free to do so. And at that point, it will be up to the Palestinian Authority to decide how many people will they allow to move into Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem. In the past, Ehud Barak, for example, suggested a symbolic number of Palestinian returners and otherwise significant financial reparations. And I think that something like that would likely be what has to happen. Importantly, what are the borders, right? This is a big point of contention. I believe that the borders are going to have to be more or less the proposed Clinton borders from the 1990s. And that's very similar to a lot of the recent ideas that have been put forward. The Palestinian territory will include the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem. The problem is that the limits of East Jerusalem are disputed. That's when Donald Trump says part of East Jerusalem, this conflict is what he's getting at. Let's imagine that there could be an agreement as to what the lines of East Jerusalem would be. East Jerusalem, at whatever agreed upon borders would be decided there, plus Gaza, the West Bank, and again, something linking them to make it a contiguous state. Jerusalem becoming the capital of Israel for international purposes. This is controversial. Many Israelis want this. Certainly the Netanyahu government wants it. Right now, internationally, the capital is Tel Aviv. Internally, Jerusalem is sort of the capital. I'm fine with Jerusalem becoming the capital of Israel for international purposes, and East Jerusalem becoming the Palestinian capital. I think that there is going to have to be something figured out with regard to the Jewish quarter of the old city in East Jerusalem. That's probably going to have to remain under Israeli sovereignty. We could do an entire show just about that. But among a list of complex options, you probably are going to have to negotiate the Jewish quarter remaining part of Israel. There was desecration of the Jewish quarter from 49 to 67. You can read more about that if you care to, but that would probably be something that has to remain under Israeli control. Of course, Israel has to immediately stop all settlement building, period. Israel needs to agree in principle to remove some settlements. They're going to have to agree to remove some settlements to get a deal done. And then again, the larger settlements that are not realistically speaking going to be dismantled, there will have to be land swaps. And the land swaps have to be of equivalent meaningful land. Not all the settlements at this point are going to realistically be removed. I wish it were different, but this is the reality. As Arafat said in the 90s, if they are meaningful land swaps, it's conceivably something that Palestinians could be open to. The security situation, what happens with travel and checkpoints and the Gaza blockade? The Palestinians will immediately, and this is why Hamas is unlikely to be a good negotiating partner. Palestinians will have to stop all rocket attacks immediately. All tunnel building would have to stop immediately. And existing tunnels meant to circumvent the security status quo would have to be destroyed right away. There would have to be an agreement to demilitarize Gaza as part of a peace agreement. And in the 2-year period after the withdrawal of Israel from Gaza, remember, but before the blockade was put in, there were just thousands of rockets. So there must be a demilitarization. And ideally, Hamas would simply not be part of these negotiations. As much as I think Benjamin Netanyahu will not be part of any credible negotiation, I don't think Hamas will be either. Israel has to remove the blockade. And the way that it would have to be done is conditional. Israel will remove the blockade immediately. And as long as there is a demilitarization in Gaza and no rocket launches is held to, the blockade removal would have to be held to as well as part of the agreement. And then a sort of broader key point, all claims must be renounced. In other words, both sides have to say, as part of this agreement, we renounce claims and this is the end of the conflict. If in the future things are done that violate that agreement, then they are violating an international agreement rather than one of these non-binding things that negotiators may put together. There has to be this is the end of the conflict. We renounce all claims. This is the agreement going forward. Is this likely to happen anytime soon? No, it is not. And is it likely to happen under Donald Trump? Definitely not.